Dr. Joseph Martin again. A wonderful, amazing topic now is thriving by awakening to higher cosmic consciousness. How to create our emerging new heaven and a new earth here. There are three aspects of this we're going to look at in sequence. One is the amazing, powerful science of consciousness, and that will be just briefly introduced. And then presently, historically at this time for the 21st century, we're going to look at how is this new emerging higher consciousness happening globally in societies and cultures of the world, in groups of people, and then how is it emerging thirdly within individuals, and how can you encourage and elaborate this higher consciousness within yourself as an individual. Well, let's start with the first then. What is the science of consciousness? This science of consciousness, in fact, includes everything we know and beyond in the fields of physics, astronomy, astrophysics, astrology, alchemy, quantum mechanics, relativistic time-space theories, Kundalini Kriya Yoga, and many, many things beyond. This science of consciousness is something that's simply coming back to us now after a kind of a diminution for the last 20,000 years on the planet. And we have these long cycles, or yuga cycles we call it, in the Hindu karmic tradition of how consciousness diminishes in dark times, and we're just, of course, coming out of the dark times. It's called the Kali Yuga, which has been here since the end of the fall of Rome in the 500s and 600s in the Common Era. And then more recently with the Enlightenment and rationalism and the Romantic era in the Western world, and some in the Arab world as well, back 300 or 400 years ago, it started to build up to a higher consciousness again. Concomitant with this was, of course, the rise with the industrial age, the technological age, the information age, and what that allowed people to do, for good or for bad, and we'll see that there's two sides to everything, is it gave rise to capitalism in the Western world as an economic, social, man-developed or humanly developed order. It's not natural. It's just something that we evolved into in terms of social political organization. And also along with that, from a side of a power over, out of capitalism grew the whole notion of colonization by European empires that wanted to take over and control and dominate all of the natural resources of the world. And in order to do that, of course, they had to take over all the indigenous tribes of the entire planet, North, Central, South America, Africa, Asia, Melanesia, Australia, and so on, and to then subject them to servitude and imprisonment or worker laborers, and or just kill them through illness or disease or whatever they brought, or certainly just guns and cannons and murder. So what this has done for the consciousness is something in the extreme, obviously, but let's go back just a minute and we'll look at the science of consciousness. Now, this is only a simple introduction to something that will be elaborated upon in further dozens of videos in terms of the science and the physics of how this happens on a minute microscopic level, atomic level, and how it works in the cosmic level. What are the levels of consciousness? There's the collective unconscious, there's the personal unconscious, there's the shadow unconscious, there's the ego, which is the kind of mediator between the unconscious and the conscious and the higher superconscious. And then beyond the ego consciousness, and this is where the kind of the thrust of where most of us on the planet are trying to move forward in our evolution, is to break the ego down out of its fears and its lies and deceit, because that's the dark side of the ego. And the light or bright side of the ego is higher ratiocination, or higher cognitive abilities of organization and thoughtfulness and development, and seeing beyond time and space and present circumstances personally and collectively. And from when we transmute the dark side of the the ego's greed, selfishness, which has led to capitalism and colonization and destruction of all that is planets and people and animals, to the bright side of the ego, which is the side that we want to be moving towards, so that the ego then can transmute and evolve and transmute and evolve to higher and higher levels of what we call the next level of social consciousness for all of us and individually is the soul consciousness, where there's some soul that awakens. And right now, most people's souls are dormant. The soul consciousness knows an eternal, immortal spark of light, and it needs a higher connection to its original home, which would be the source of all that is. And that's found in the heart, as we'll see in a moment. Beyond the soul consciousness, we can go to higher levels of stellar consciousness, like the lunar consciousness, the solar consciousness, and then beyond that to the entire matter of the universe or the cosmos, because cosmology is an inherent science in the study of consciousness. The matter of the entire universe, which we'll get into on our next video on dark matter and dark force, is the what we can call the Christ consciousness, the Purusha, as we say in Ayurveda or Hindu Vedic terms. The Christ consciousness, which is a term, but it's a reality. It could be the Buddha consciousness, it could be the Muhammad consciousness, it could be the crazy horse consciousness for our First Nations indigenous way. This is a term that accepts the fact that all Christ consciousness is all material reality in the third and fourth and fifth dimensions of the entire cosmos. Irregardless of your cultural background, it is a reality in the creation mythologies of all the First Nations and all the civilized higher, not higher in a better way, but just, more advanced in social, political, economic organization. Beyond the Christ consciousness, if we can leave it with that term, which is all matter in the entire universe, that's all the galaxies and so on, is the invisible cosmic consciousness out of which all things come. And that would be the dark force, as we call it in physics. In any case, this is where we are all evolving and striving to grow and emancipate ourselves into higher and higher consciousness. We are moving back on the swing towards the next golden age, Sat Yuga, as we say in Hindu terms. And we will get there. There'll be some drama and trauma along the way, but that's what we're all here for. We hit the wall and then we move forward because we break through the wall and then we move through to a higher consciousness. How do we know this is happening? Well, the scientific evidence from an anthropological perspective shows it that within the last 100, 200 years, we have things like cargo cults, which in Melanesia, New Guinea, New Britain, New Ireland are these cults which actually try to experience something and then ask for the ancestors or for beings from higher consciousness to come and give them things that have been taken away from them, which is land and food and water and resources and goods that all the people in the Western world would have, material objects like cars. We have millennial movements, which is every 100 years when the clock turns over. We have things like Y2K, we have the apocalypse in the Western world, the end times, and so on. These are all consciousness movements striving for something greater. We have different movements among all the First Nations. We have the Ghost Dance, which Sitting Bull and many others in our Lakota way and all our First Nations over 100 years ago came up with when everything was taken away from the colonization invasion. They needed to find some asking of the ancestors, the higher spirit, blue road people, our ancestors, our high spirit guardians, to come back, and particularly the white buffalo calf woman, to bring to us some higher knowledge of how we can move through into the next stage while still being here in the physical on earth. The Rastafari movement with Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, many, many others, which is now a worldwide phenomenon, that too is another group cultural movement to try to deal with the suppression and the compression of what has been taken away in terms of truth, freedom, and love and communal support. These are just some of many, many examples we have in social cultural anthropology that have happened in the last 100 or 200 years about movements like the Civil War and the emancipation of the black slaves in America, or on and on and on. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Canadian Reformation. We didn't actually revolt. And all these are movements within groups and collectives of people for higher spiritual, psychological, and earthly consciousness. Now, how can you do this on an individual level, which is the third point for discussion here today? Well, the easiest way, and we have to recognize that there are many paths up the spiritual mountain, but they all lead to the same top of the mountain. And it doesn't matter whatever mystical tradition you choose to align yourself with, or like me and Joseph Campbell, you can cross the wires and try to enjoy them all. But whether it's Sufism or Gnostic Western Christianity, mystical tradition, Rastafari, whatever it might be for you, Kabbalah, it could be any of these or many more, you can do it through the need to reflect inwardly, lower your brainwave state to the alpha, theta, delta states, do a lot of deep inner reflection and meditation, do yoga. There are many kinds of yoga. However, this I Am Yoga, which has been presented in other YouTube videos here on this channel, suggests that we can enjoin the ancient traditions of Kundalini Kriya Yoga, Raja Yoga, the king of yogas, Karma Yoga, which is doing the work to energize and emancipate yourself, and Bhakti or heart devotional yoga into the I Am Yoga. The purpose for this is to move your assemblage point of consciousness from your unconscious to your ego, to the bright ego once you've transmuted the dark ego, to the higher soul ego consciousness, and then to the lunar, the solar, and eventually the Christ consciousness, and then into the cosmic consciousness. Many people in the world are experiencing these days, and it seems in 2013 it's easier to do this. It's like the 100th monkey effect than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. This is a common occurrence. It's what the individual, you yourself watching and listening, can do, needs to do, and can easily do when you find the right kind of training and teaching. The time of gurus and teachers is really over, but you may need some mentoring and coaching around this as well. I would highly recommend, if you want to know the science of higher consciousness, there are many great books, even some Canadian great books on it. Cosmic Consciousness by Dr. Richard Buck, written about 140 years ago, the first Canadian psychiatrist. However, what I would suggest for you is to enjoin your consciousness to the greatest book, one of the greatest books on the planet, to help you understand the science, the structure, and function of higher consciousness. What is that book? That book is the Bhagavad Gita, the ancient Hindu book, the holy book, one of the many holy books of ancient and modern India. Now, there are many variations and explanations on this book, translations. The one that I personally use, although I have read many others of it, is the one by Paramahansa Yogananda that I've talked about in my YouTube video on Paramahansa Yogananda. The Bhagavad Gita, his version, his translation from Sanskrit to English with his commentary of contemporary psychological awareness. Within this, when you read the 2 volumes, and also The Second Coming of Christ, which is another 2 volumes set by Yogananda, which is even a more advanced awareness and study of the science of consciousness. And since Einstein, we know that everything in the world and the universe is only consciousness. Every little bit of matter, my fingers, this piano, the computer that you're watching, the table you're at, the chair you're sitting on, it's all consciousness and energy. Knowing that consciousness is everything, and everything in our future as humans, in terms of science or just personal, practical, day-to-day life, all revolves around consciousness. I'm sure you are now excited to study the higher states of consciousness and to explore and experience them as a great adventure for yourself. Well, there's Dr. Joseph Martin here for you now. Over and out and in, onwards and upwards. All light and all love. Blessings to you now and always.